Story 1. My parents read to me every night growing up, and it made me fall in love with books. It was not just about the stories. It was the bonding and the calm before sleep. I did the same with my children when they were small, and I saw how it helped their vocabulary, imagination, and emotional understanding. It is such a small habit that leaves a lasting impact. Story 2. I am a teacher and I can often tell which students have had many books read to them. They have a richer vocabulary, greater awareness of the world, and are able to discuss not only stories but also what is happening in day-to-day life with confidence and curiosity. Story 3. Yes. Every night my brother, Dad, and I would lie in my parents' bed while Dad read to us. Mom used this time to have a long bath or just time to herself. We had a book of lavishly illustrated fairy tales that we always read from, and over time my brother and I started to recognize the words. When Dad realized this, he began pretending he did not know the words so we would help him read the book. I now work in education, and research has shown that the single most important thing parents can do for their child's literacy is to regularly read to them. Story 4. Yes, Mom read regularly. She read well past the age when my brother and I were learning to read for ourselves, moving on to content well above our current reading levels. Lots of classics. Mom did voices for characters and took side trips for us to learn about things related to the content of the book. There were books where we read with a dictionary handy so we could look up words we didn't know. She would cook a dish mentioned in a story or seek it out somewhere. I'm still disappointed in Turkish Delight. She read us Treasure Island. Halfway through, we drove down to Corpus Christi where there were some replica and very old sailing ships. We walked around on a tiny, all-wooden boat with its canvas sails, ropes, and pulleys. It brought the story to life. We had a driving trip to California planned to visit family. Part of the trip was to Sequoia National Park, among the giant redwoods. She read The Lord of the Rings. She carefully timed the story so that she read about the party arriving in Lothlorien and its giant Malorn trees while seated around the campfire under the giant redwoods. I read to my own kids, of course, but now I work as a substitute teacher and frequently read to high school students. They love it. Nothing is more fun than reading a bit of Shakespeare and then saying, "That was a dirty joke," and watching them turn back to the text to figure it out. Story 5. My dad did. It was the only time we had just us. I did the same with my son and did not realize how much he could read due to that ritual until the kindergarten teacher complained she had to get him much harder books. Story 6. Yes, Mom read to us aloud when we were in the womb and in the early years of school. We could read before we went to school and were always ahead in reading and writing. It built confidence, the ability to articulate our thoughts, and improved self-expression. It shaped my education, my interactions, my worldview, and my career. Story 7. I am not sure my mother could read very well. She could read simple words and basic texts. However, her education was minimal and she rarely read. When I got older, she sometimes had me read to her. This encouraged me to want to read. Story 8. My father did. Swiss Family Robinson, Ivanhoe. The bonding and emotion in his voice, how he sometimes struggled with unfamiliar words. We were not a physically affectionate family. I have changed that with my own child. His reading to us was one of the ways he expressed his love. Story 9. I have done so since my children were babies. I am currently awaiting an autism diagnosis and actually really struggled to communicate when my first was born, so I just read to her constantly. By the time I had my second child, it had become a habit. They are now 16 and 12. I still read to them at night. Neither needs me to, but I have asked my oldest if she still wants me to, and she does. We are currently reading The Hunger Games, which she has already read. She knows I haven't had time to read it but wanted to, so it is more for me than her at this stage. I haven't pushed for it. My kids both simply enjoy this time together. Story 10. They did until I took over reading for myself. I learned to read pretty early. I have done the same with my own children, and they also learned to read early. Everyone in our household reads as a leisure activity. Story 11. Reading to your children is truly one of the best things you can do as a parent for their reading comprehension and development. Story 12. Absolutely every night until I was a preteen, My sister and I would climb into our father's lap or the chair next to our mother. Mostly, I remember my dad reading, though. It was special time for us. Benefits? Specifically, great memories of special time with my father. Probably had something to do with my love of reading and learning. I learned to read between 3 and 4 years old, and both my parents read for pleasure even when life was busy. Now, my spouse or I read to our child every day. We have a loose rule that we will pretty much always say yes to buying a book, especially when we're traveling or visiting museums. Kiddos' favorites are kids' encyclopedias, books about science, the Dogman and Cat Kid books, and poetry. We have the Shel Silverstein anthologies and several other collections. He's not really old enough to care about Tupac Shakur's book, but he was really interested in Amanda Gorman. He likes my Big Norton anthology and having me read parts of random poems, but didn't really care for the favorite children's poems collection. I assume that our passion and effort has something to do with my son's passion for information and his, according to his school, advanced language processing skills. But really, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. It's like the Robert Frost poem, "The Road Not Taken." I have only this one life to live with these choices I have made, so I'm naturally going to assume that my choices mattered because I want to and have no way of knowing otherwise. Story 13. I am positive it helped my vocabulary and is the reason I was reading at a college level in 6th grade. It was also a good way for me to experience the world without having to go anywhere. It definitely fed my imagination. Story 14. Most nights I read early and well. I also loved reading to my own children. It is very interesting and fun to see them enjoying their books. Story 15. Yes, my mother did the same for my brother and me, and I loved those times. They faded once I became older, but it was great. It gave me a love of books. Story 16. Reading to your children is incredibly important for closeness, calm bedtimes, and instilling a lifetime love of books and stories. My parents always read to us. We always read to our children. It makes all the difference in the world. Story 17. No, they did get me a library card when I was 4 or 5, and I read to myself every night as I did not have a television. I started on Asterix Comics and Enid Blyton. Then at about 8 I read books like The Hobbit, Kess, My Side of the Mountain, Swallows, and Amazons. I would read for at least 4 hours a night right through to adulthood. Then I discovered Xbox and have not read a book in years now, sadly. Story 18. I remember being read to a lot, probably as a toddler, and when I couldn't get an adult to read to me, I was very upset. I desperately wanted to learn to read, but no one would teach me. I was told, "You'll have to wait for school." And it was a couple of years until I began kindergarten. Until then, I had a little tape recorder and a bag full of read-along books with audio tapes like The Secret of Nim, for example. I took those everywhere and had most memorized. I'm positive being read to inspired my love of books, reading, and writing. It's hard to find time as an adult, but about 10 years ago, I made a New Year's resolution to read at least a chapter before sleep, and I've continued ever since. Memories were jogged today about being so excited to finally go to school and learn how to read. I want to add that perhaps it was a good thing no adults taught me to read before school. I am fairly certain this fostered a love of school and learning. To this day, I miss college, learning new things, and writing papers. Story 19, mine did, and as a direct result, I was able to read at age 4, much to their surprise. To this day, I read almost anything I can get my hands on. Story 20, my parents did. The biggest takeaway was when they would not tell me the definition of words and forced me to use context clues as a young kid. It was hugely beneficial. Story 21. Yes, the most noticeable benefit was that I somehow learned to read at an adult level by the time I was 4 or 5 without anyone specifically teaching me. Both my parents read to me constantly since I was born, whether children's books or whatever they were reading themselves. I would sit on their lap, and they would read the book out loud while moving their finger along the words, and I just learned by osmosis. They also took me to the library once a week, and I could take out any books I wanted. I did not really understand that libraries were divided into children's and adult sections. I thought all the books there were for everyone because sometimes anyone might want a picture book about a hungry caterpillar, and other times they wanted a novel or a nonfiction book. I was a big fan of Sir Walter Scott and Robert Louis Stevenson by the time I started school at 5. Since my parents had given me my own dictionary by that time, I read anything I could find, and if I did not know a word, I looked it up. I was already hooked from as young as I can remember. Then, as soon as I discovered the fantasy genre by reading The Lord of the Rings at age 8, I was extremely hooked. Story 22. My parents read to us almost every night. We went to the library together to pick out books. After that, we started reading on our own, choosing our own books, asking for books for our birthdays and Christmas, and coming up with our own stories that we would tell each other. It did wonders for our imagination and our love for stories. Story 23. In middle school, I was tearing through books so quickly that I had to lie on my reading log to make it look like books took longer to read because my teacher wouldn't believe me when I read 2 books a day, while other kids struggled with like 5 pages. Some kids stayed up with their game consoles under the covers. I had small book lights I'd hide under my pillow to stay up later than I should to finish a book. A couple of teachers called me out in high school for reading under my desk. These days, I don't read as many books but enjoy anecdotes and stories on social media a lot. I reread the Hunger Games series recently and once again found myself up too late for just one more chapter, except no parents to bust in and confiscate my books. I always had books everywhere in my room. My bed setups always required a shelf next to another shelf. I never understood why other kids didn't love books as much as I did. Story 24. I was read to very often, not only at night as I demanded. I learned how to read at the age of 3. My parents are not really sure how. Consequences. A teacher called home when I was 10 because when asked to bring a favorite book, I brought a 1969 copy of The Two Towers and happily read about orcs threatening to torture Merry and Pippin, my favorite part. She confiscated my book and asked my parents if they had a system to keep inappropriate books away. My mother told her they were running out of hiding spaces. They only ever hid The Witcher and the Da Vinci Code because my grandmother was very religious, and I would walk around talking about Jesus being married, which I did after finding and reading those books in secret. I received very high marks on essays and reading comprehension. I have a deep love for books and literature and have earned 3 degrees. I have an autism diagnosis. Story 25. Honestly, instead of reading to me, my parents set up an audio player with books at night. I do not remember exactly what it was, or if I am remembering correctly. I was born in 1996, and this was probably when I was 3 to 5 years old, based on what they have said about it. I hated reading until I was an adult. Story 26. Yes, I used to demand to be read to for hours. I am from a family of teachers, so I guess it was inevitable. Story 27. My parents read to me every day. As a result, I placed higher than my peers in reading comprehension and writing. To this day, I can spot people whose parents did not read to them. I passed the love of reading to my children as they grew up by reading to them every night as well. Story 28. My parents did, and so did my sisters. It helped develop speech and the thought process, feeding into the imagination and stimulating both cognitive and language development. Story 29. We read to our children every night, and both exceed their expected reading level by at least 2 grades. My older child, who is going into 6th grade next year, reads at almost a college level. My younger child is moving into 2nd grade and reads at about a 5th grade level. They now read on their own before bed. My older son can finish a few 100-page novel in a couple of nights. Story 30. Mine did. It helped me learn to read early. I was able to read fairly basic sentences by age 3, so I had a significant advantage over many children by the time I reached kindergarten. I think it also gave me a fondness for reading that I still have. Story 31. Yes. My dad used to fall asleep halfway through, and we'd poke him awake, saying, "Read, read." It was good bonding time. I loved Pooh and Piglet and everyone else in the 100-Acre Wood, plus Richard Scarry's illustrated masterpieces. One of my favorites was Big Bird and Little Bird's Big and Little Book. My dad would read the big things in his deepest voice, and I'd say the little ones. Eventually, I discovered that I could read by myself when I was not quite 4. I realized that the shapes I was looking at were letters, and I knew my letters. Then I put them together like the 2-headed monster on Sesame Street. I shocked my parents, and my grandma used to make me read the newspaper for her friends. When I was 5 and 6, my mom read us the Chronicles of Narnia. I was responsible for holding the right-hand side of the book open and turning the page. Eventually, I was able to read along faster to myself than she could talk. I don't remember going to the library as a toddler, but in elementary school, it seemed like we'd go every week. We didn't have much, but there was always a spare dollar or three for a new book on Scholastic Day. By middle school, I had a big bookshelf in my room and filled it. I still have tons of my own books in my house now that I reread and add to. I think being read to at a young age and being shown that it was a valuable skill helped me develop a lifelong love of reading. I probably would have enjoyed it anyway, as it seems like an ingrained talent too, but maybe not to the extent I took it. Reading was and remains a cherished hobby. Story 32. My husband and I had 2 children when we were young. I read to them every night. 6 years later, we had 2 more children, and our lives became very hectic. I did not read to them every night after that, and I regret it. My 2 oldest children are not only avid readers but also very successful, a mechanical engineer and an architect. My 2 younger children never became readers and, while not failures in life by any means, have had a much harder time finding their paths. They both work in careers that require heavy physical strain. One of my greatest regrets is that I did not devote as much time to my younger children when they were little, such as reading to them every night. Story 33. Both my parents read to me, as did my older sisters. I credit my family for my ability to read on my own as a toddler. I have always been a bookworm because of my family's support. Even though I have recently switched to audiobooks, I still love a good story. Reading with my dad is one of the few good memories I have of him. Story 34. I read to my children not every night but more often than not. We started with the Little House series, moved on to Ramona, and now we are working through the Indian in the cupboard. After that, we will do Narnia. It is a special time I get with them. We all look forward to it, and my children love to read. Story 35. Dad read to my brother and me every night. It was our special time and gave Mom a break. The benefits included many memories of sitting on my bed, snuggled up to Dad, feeling warm, loved, and safe, as well as a lifelong love of reading. Story 36. My parents, usually my father, read to me every night until I could read, and then made me read to them. Now I am older, and honestly, I miss it. It was a fun little habit I knew would happen every night, so no matter how much I missed my father or how long he worked, I always knew we would read together before bed. Story 37. I don't recall them reading to me every night. My grandpa would read to me sometimes when he was home because he worked a lot. Both my grandmothers would tell me stories they made up. I don't remember my mother reading to me, but she also worked a lot. However, everyone in my family valued reading. I am an only child, so it was books, television, or video games to entertain myself. Always a multitasker, I often turned on the television and read at the same time. My mother could never figure out how I managed to pay attention to both simultaneously. Story 38. Oh God, no. I read a lot but just picked it up. No one read to me, maybe once, but it was not a thing. Story 39. Yes, they did. I absolutely loved it and always enjoyed reading myself. However, I do not know if that is connected because my sister was also read to all the time by my mom, but she never enjoyed reading herself much. Story 40. It instilled a love for reading and also a love for fantasy. Books expanded my interest into other things such as writing, crafting, and movies. Story 41. I did. Honestly, I never wanted them to finish, so I learned to read a lot at a very young age. I became a totally precocious reader and have devoured thousands of books to date, reveling in wordplay. By contrast, I read every night to my son until he was almost 11, but he has not picked up that habit, although he always preferred me making up stories for him. He still has a good vocabulary, but my love of books has not been passed down. I hope that it will develop as he matures. Story 42. Mine did not, but a friend of mine had parents who did, so I can see both sides. He learned to read sooner, and I would say he is quite intelligent. That said, we are both adults now. I am an avid reader, whereas he does not pick up a book. Initially, there are many benefits, but in adulthood, it does not really matter. Story 43. If it was not my parents, it was my older sister. I always had a high reading level, usually about a grade or two higher than expected. It created a love for reading that no one else in my immediate family has. Now, I am becoming an English teacher. It is clear to me when students have had positive interactions with books because they have stronger vocabulary, confidence in reading and interpreting, and usually independently seek reading materials, whether it is a book, fan fiction, or something else. Story 44. Every night they read to me several times throughout the day. As a result, I spontaneously picked it up at 3 years old. Story 45. Yes. My mother read to me, my father told me stories even though he was not reading directly from a book, and my grandmother read to me when I stayed with her. I learned to read early, had above-average reading scores throughout school, and grew up loving books. These are some of the only early childhood memories that have stuck with me, and they are very positive ones. Story 46. It is not just about giving them a love for books. It is about spending quality time together and making memories. Story 47. My parents read to me every night, and I was really excited to learn how to read. One of my fondest memories is beginning to read and reading a book to my father. I believe it brought me closer to my father since he worked long hours, and it was one of the few ways I got to spend time with him as a child. Story 48. My mom read to my brother and me as small children. We both love books in print, audio, and digital formats. We have always had a large vocabulary and are able to spell correctly without autocorrect. Reading to children has enormous benefits and no disadvantages. Story 49. I love books. Now my children love books too. They have real conversations with excellent vocabulary. Story 50. I vaguely remember my mother and father reading to me on different nights, but I clearly remember them asking me to read to them. They would hand me the book, and we would sit together while I read the story to them until it was bedtime and I fell asleep. That seems like a very long time ago. Story 51. I don't know if it was every night, but it was most nights, and I think I was being read to until I was about 10. I also read my own books during the daytime, but the first few Harry Potter books were read to me at night, and I was about 8 to 11 when they came out. These are treasured memories that remind me how much my parents loved and cared for me. I was beginning to read and write before I started reception and read several years beyond the expected level throughout school. Who knows if that was nature or nurture? What I like most about the memory is that it was an expression of love. I never doubted that my parents liked me and wanted to spend time with me. I've never thought my parents' approval or affection was conditional. Talking to some people I know, not everybody had that. Story 52. Yes, all kinds of books, not just picture books. I did not always understand all the words, but I loved imagining the scenes being described. Some of the Lord of the Rings scared me, and some of the James Ario series made me cry, but I loved almost all of Anne of Green Gables. It was a treasured part of my early childhood that ended when I was 5 years old. Story 53. My parents did not read to me as a child, but I absolutely do not hold it against them at all. I grew to love reading on my own around age 7. My wife and I have children, ages 7, 5, and 3. I started reading The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit books to them at bedtime a little over 2 years ago. Eventually, I had them read out loud to me, and my 7-year-old can now read in English and Spanish. Granted, his reading skills are much better in English, but he is doing very well in Spanish as well. My 5-year-old just finished kindergarten and is already reading at a second grade level in English. He is also picking up reading in Spanish quite well. Since I started reading to them, our children have started collecting their own books and now read randomly throughout the day. They also read before going to sleep on their own at night while in bed using their little night lamps. Here is our routine. After they shower in the evenings, I sit down with my boys individually and have them read out loud to me a few pages, both in English and Spanish. Then they go to bed and I read to them in Spanish for a little while. After I say goodnight and leave the room, they read on their own for a while. When I first started reading to them a little over 2 years ago, right before bedtime, I really had to fight my own urges for me time, which was just waiting for them to fall asleep while I chatted with my wife or used my phone. Even our youngest, the 3-year-old, absolutely loves having either me or my wife read to her randomly throughout the day. There has been a huge benefit as far as I can see. Our two oldest can read well past their own grade levels, and they love to read books on their own, which absolutely melts my heart. They do not have tablets or smartphones, so they are not obsessed with screen time. When we go on road trips, they always have books with them. They play outside every chance they get. They have a toy room and a collection of Legos they play with. They use their imagination a lot. They get to watch television, but that is limited to Netflix, Disney, and movies on Prime. They do not get to watch all day. They are all very social little children. They love meeting new kids and playing with them. Story 54. My parents read to me every night, and early on we started reading a few chapters from novels each night. Besides the usual benefits like falling in love with books, it opened me up to visual art and artistic interpretations. We often read books that had movies in the works or had already been released. I used my imagination with the words on the page, but I also saw how other minds worked when the director put their ideas on the screen. This perspective was very important to my developing fascination with art. Story 55. I read every night to my daughter. By second grade, she was reading at a 10th grade level. She now has her master's degree and runs the educational program at our local zoo. I was not read to, and I do not have a college degree, but I made sure she had one. Story 56. I read to my children almost every night until they started school because by then they were reading independently. It is such a great practice with no downsides. They are reading at a grade level higher than their peers at school, so it is a great investment of your time for 5 to 10 minutes each night. Story 57. They only missed during emergencies, such as when my grandfather had a heart attack or when everyone was very sick. This support really helped increase how much I read. I averaged 3 books a week. I am currently reading The Color Purple. It also helped create some very happy memories for me. Story 58. I read to all my children from the time they were babies many times a day. They all learned to read by kindergarten age, and by 3rd grade, they all tested at the highest possible 12th grade level on state tests. Story 59. We don't read every night, but we do sing every night 3 short songs that probably take about 10 minutes. Something about it just calms my youngest down immediately. When we read before singing, the same effect happens as long as it is a chill, short book. Usually, she just asks me to sing to her. Story 60. Yes, parents read to me every night until I could read by myself, and then they had me read to them. Eventually, it led to me reading before bed on my own. I credit much of my literacy to the deep dive into books I had from a young age. It instilled a craving for knowledge and a desire to learn more. Story 61. My mom read age-appropriate books for me and my 4 younger brothers. Dr. Seuss, Boxcar Children, Anne of Green Gables, Chronicles of Narnia, and Harry Potter for my youngest brothers. She would read aloud for hours when we went on road trips, always finishing a book or series before starting another. My dad read The Hobbit whenever one of us was in 1st grade. He read it 5 times growing up. He read the entire Lord of the Rings when I was in 3rd to 5th grade before the movies came out. Almost every year, starting in October, he would read A Christmas Carol. After we had all watched Star Wars, he read Splinter of the Mind's Eye to us. During the summers, we read adventure books like Swiss Family Robinson, Treasure Island, and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. We would often be in the middle of one book when Dad would start reading another, and we would hop back and forth. Can you guess which parent had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? I remember these stories as much as I remember important moments in my life. I struggled to read until I was about 12. Then, almost overnight, I jumped to a high school reading level. I credit my parents for reading to me for that. I have also maintained a lifelong love of reading. Story 62. I have no recollection of being read to, but I do not remember much about my childhood aside from the traumatic parts. Books were always available because all the women in my family were big readers. By year 3, I was reading at a year 5 level and was always quite advanced in reading skills compared to the average skill level. My eldest, I read to her as a baby, but that only lasted until she could talk. I tried to read to her, but she was such a chatterbox that she would just talk over me, so we used to have a bedtime chat instead. My youngest only ever liked Each Peach Pear Plum and the Guess How Much I Love You books, so I have no idea how much that helped with vocabulary. Neither of them ever had any learning difficulty with reading or speech, and they both go through on and off phases with reading, just like me. Story 63. My dad made up stories of his own, but both parents also read to us. My brothers and I enjoy reading as adults. I have a good vocabulary, did well in school, I am creative and empathetic, and I still have to read to fall asleep at age 47. Story 64. Yes, my parents and grandmother read to me a lot. I have wonderful memories of my dad reading Peter Pan or my grandma reading The Secret Garden. I have always loved books. Any kind of story, really. I was not an especially early reader, but I took to it like a fish to water once I learned. I majored in English, write as a hobby, recently finished law school, and still read every single day, novels on my own and children's books to my toddler. He loves books and reading too, and snuggling up to read together is something he and I love so much. I hope he wants us to read together forever. I will read to him every day for as long as he lets me. Story 65. My mom would get the books that had the cassette tapes with them and play them at night. I craved so much for her to read to me instead. She was a single mother and was just exhausted at the end of the day. Story 66. My parents read to me. My father used to read book series that he liked when he was younger. They have a big library and bookshelves in almost every room in their house, so obviously I am also a voracious reader. Story 67. My parents did not read to me, but they did read to my younger siblings. I am going to blame the choice of literature rather than the action itself because we all turned out to be pretty big idiots. Story 68. Yes. I have been able to read since I was 4 years old, and I am a speed reader. I cannot tell you how because I have always read that way. I used to sit and wait for someone else to turn their test in first at school, because I was always done at least 10 to 15 minutes before everyone else. Story 69. Yes, a lot. My father especially liked reading The Hobbit to me. Now I read a lot and I am writing a book, so I think it helped. Story 70. Yes, Dad had reading time every night before bed for me and my sisters. We could read before we started kindergarten. I received the collected works of H.G. Wells for Christmas when I was 8. We went to the library every month. Every time I asked Dad a question, like, why is the sky blue? He would take me to the encyclopedia and look it up, rarely scattering if you want to know. Story 71. My mom and dad did. They took turns. My favorite books were the pop-up dinosaur books. Having them read to me helped me learn to read and gave me quite the appetite for books. Some of my favorite memories are snuggling up with them to read. Story 72. Mine read to us growing up. We read to our children too. They both read at or above grade level, entered kindergarten knowing letters, their sounds, and could recognize several sight words and their names. Story 73. My parents did. I remember some of the stories they read, and I would say it created fond memories more than anything else. I do not think it made me smarter or made me like reading more. Story 74. I learned to read very early, and I believe it is the reason my childhood was difficult. I could read at a higher level than average for my age. My parents assumed I would be gifted at everything. From the age of 6 until I was about 17, I was told almost daily that I was a disappointment because I could not get good grades in school. I have a learning disability and an anxiety disorder that they refused to acknowledge. I was also abused by a teacher, which my parents knew about, but they thought I deserved it because of how I acted. I was 7 years old. The worst thing that happened to me was being able to read very well at a young age because it completely distorted everyone's expectations of my abilities in school. My emotional and social intelligence were stunted because I was not allowed to participate in activities children my age were doing, as I was not meeting impossible expectations. Story 75. My mom said she read aloud from the time she found out she was pregnant. Recipes, magazines, letters, books, whatever she was reading. I do love to read. Story 76. My dad read poetry to me. I can only remember once, but I imagine he did it more. I became a published poet as an adult. Story 77. Started reading with my son when he was 6 months old, right before bedtime. We began with picture books, pointing out the words. He is 9 now, He loves to read before bed, to the point that he does not want to sleep. He has a large vocabulary and constantly asks what new words mean. Yesterday, we talked about dragoons on the drive home. It is his calming routine, just cuddling with me while we read. Story 78. My parents did not, but my grandmother would read when my sister and I, often joined by one of our cousins, went to sleep. I even obtained a copy of the book she read some time ago. Story 79. My parents read to me every night, starting when I was too young to remember. My mother tells stories of things I did and said during these times that I definitely do not recall. I fell in love with books and reading, a trait that has lasted well into adulthood. As a child, I was told that I had an above-average vocabulary, which I presume was due to all the reading. Story 80. My dad read to me every night. My parents also filled me with unwavering love and support. I have always done well in public school. All accelerated classes, academic achievement award in middle school, highest distinction in high school, graduated from an Ivy League university and got a good job. I actually don't read that much, just a few books every couple of years, but I do like keeping up with information online. Beyond reading to me every night, they also tried to always talk to me using an adult vocabulary, which I think really helped my development. Overall, it was mostly about feeling loved and cared for and knowing I could count on them for anything. I was also rewarded with money for grades on my report card and never felt any pressure from them to fulfill some arbitrary form of success. They gave positive affirmations when I did something good and constructive feedback if I needed to improve. They also signed me up for many activities that I enjoyed. I pretty much grew up playing every sport available in the area. While reading every night is a great practice, I believe it is usually associated with other important parental practices that have many positive effects. Story 81. My dad read Harry Potter to me every night before bed until I was old enough to read by myself. I am pretty sure that as a result, I became better at reading, writing, and expanded my vocabulary. Story 82. My brother and sister, especially my brother, started reading fairly early because my parents regularly read to us. I started reading at a normal age, around 5 or 6, but progressed very rapidly. I began reading chapter books at 7, was in the advanced readers program by 8, and had a college reading level by 10. My mom says that when she read to me and my sister, I was totally absorbed by the story, and my sister was focused on trying to figure out how the words worked. My brother benefited not only from our parents reading to him, but also from my sister and me reading to him. I have a very vivid memory of reading a book about soccer to him and getting excited when he read the last sentence, which was, "Yay, we win," by himself. Story 83. My dad read to me constantly when I was a kid. I grew up with a love of reading, and I am a published author now. My brother did not like to sit still for reading. He did poorly in school because of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but improved eventually and now has a master's degree. Reading is not one of his hobbies, but he is smart. His young son loves to bring books to people and turn the pages. Story 84. Yeah, my mom did. I always wanted the same story, Three Little Pigs. One day, she replaced a word with another, and I corrected her. She was surprised and asked me if I knew it by heart, and I said, "No, I recognized the word, and it wasn't it." I was only 5, so she had me take a reading test for 6-year-olds, and it turns out I had learned to read just by listening to her reading the same story again and again. The 26 letters, the combinations like sich, ou, or many others we have in French. I just knew how to read without anyone teaching me. So yeah, it helped a lot. Primary school is a breeze when you don't have to focus on reading, or at least don't struggle with it from day one. Story 85. My mother and father read to me every night when I was his age, and it started a lifelong love of reading, learning, and questioning. So I read to my son every night too. Only 3 stories though. There have to be limits. Story 86. Yes. Absolutely crucial for children's brain development, even when they are little babies. My parents did it until I was old enough and wanted to read independently. I am still a voracious reader as an adult. Story 87. I remember many conversations about what a word meant or why a character did something, which enriched my vocabulary and background knowledge. As a parent, It is a great way to be close to your child when you are too tired to be creative or patient with playing what they want. Story 88. My parents read to us. My siblings and I are all enthusiastic readers. I read about 100 books a year. Nothing wrong with that. Story 89. Yes. My parents read to us every night when we were young. When we got a little older, we were read longer books. I think it gave my brother and me a better sense of the world we live in, exercised our creativity and imaginations, gave us empathy for others' experiences, and allowed us to practice communicating what we were hearing back to adults by listening and sharing. I grew up poor, and my parents lacked many life skills. But this small habit set us up for success in school and helped us learn how to gain life skills once we became adults. Story 90. I read to my children every night and have noticed a significant difference in them compared to other children their age. Their vocabulary is impressive, and they always speak as if they are older than they are. Story 91. My parents, grandmother, or older siblings read to me every day. My husband and I read to our children, and now they read to our grandchildren. Education was easier, as was learning in general, because we were all taught to read about what we wanted to know or to look it up if we had questions. Story 92. My dad read to me every night. I have very fond memories of reading different books with him. I am still a voracious reader. Reading to children before bed is the only thing that appeals to me about actually having children. Story 93. My mom read to me every night. I was an early reader, but I don't think that's the biggest benefit. Hearing a story is the first building block of empathy. The listener or reader hears about events from someone else's point of view. Taking on that perspective is a fundamental social and emotional skill. This is why some groups are adamant about censoring books. They are not afraid that a book will influence someone's identity. They are afraid a book will help their child empathize with others. Story 94. Not read. But my dad used to make up stories for me and then my sister, mostly about lions. This went on for almost 13 years of my life. I think these stories made my sister and me want to read more. Silly storybooks before, then encyclopedias, and now novels. Story 95. My mom read to me when I was very little, but once I learned to read, I took over. It frustrated me that she sometimes rejected a book I wanted to hear, so I wanted to take over as soon as I could to choose the book every night. I suppose it helped because I became determined to read specific books and kept the habit for a while. Story 96. My father read books to me every night. Consequently, I love reading, have a decent vocabulary, and can spell correctly. Story 97. Not only did my mom read to me nightly, but I also saw my parents reading for leisure all the time. I grew up in a household full of books. I became and still am a voracious reader. I have a fairly extensive vocabulary even in my second language, English. I have not succumbed to artificial intelligence and social media brain rot. I write all my own correspondence, lesson plans, and public-facing copy for my organization. Story 98. I don't know about every night, but absolutely my parents read to me. As an adult, I didn't actually turn out to be a big reader of novels or books on my own, but I did become fairly proficient in the English language. I am also a genuinely curious person and interested in the world around me, and I trace part of that back to those sessions. I have a 9-year-old boy now, and we read to him every night until around 8. We only stopped because now he does the reading, sometimes with me or my wife in the room. His bedtime is now 9 o'clock to be in bed, but he is allowed to stay up reading until 10:30 p.m. with his little book light. He loves the library and has several series of books he enthusiastically reads. Here in Texas, we have something called the State of Texas Assessments of Academic Readiness, which are the big standardized tests the kids have to take at the end of the school year. The first time they take the State of Texas Assessments of Academic Readiness is in 3rd grade, which my child just finished. I got his reading language arts result last night. He scored in the 99th percentile. I am very proud. Story 99. I do not remember my parents reading to me, so I think after learning to read myself, I read on my own. My mother would definitely help with words and other things, and both my sister and I were early readers. There were always books around. We visited the library often, and books were something my mother would frequently buy if we asked at the store. My mother was always reading as well. We often read the same books and talked about them. Story 100. I don't recall it, but talking to my mother, she did try to read to me every night, and when I was old enough, she would get me to read alongside her. As for effects, I can't say for certain that it is from the regular reading. But at school, when the other children just started reading books like Magic Key, Biff, Chip and Kipper, a lot of the kids in my class struggled with the first stage around age 4 to 5. I ended up going to the library and getting things like Roald Dahl, Enid Blyton, C.S. Lewis, and just reading what I wanted because I was beyond the basic classroom books. My nephew is in a similar situation. His mother and father read to him regularly. He hasn't started school yet, but he is already able to read normal books. The only thing stopping him is his attention span. Story 101. Yes, I have specific memories of being curled up on the couch with Mom while she read me the Little House on the Prairie series, one chapter a night. That, plus the sheer number of books in the house, the fact that when Mom wasn't busy cleaning or cooking, she could be found on the couch with a book, and our regular trips to the big library in the next town over. We grew up just accepting that reading all the time was normal and fun. I remember being bored in elementary school with any subject that required reading comprehension. Read a little story, answer questions about it, snore. I raced through the reading comprehension exercises in school so fast the special education teacher told me I could just hang out and read whatever I wanted during those periods. We just had a baby last month, and I hope to instill the same love of reading in him as my parents did with me. For my baby shower, my only request was that everyone bring or suggest their favorite children's books. The family came through in full force, and the baby boy's bookshelf is already overflowing. Story 102. It made me love books. I have been a voracious reader since I was little and would pretend to read before I actually could. My mom would tuck us in, sing, and pray with us, and sometimes my dad would too. I burst into tears when I hear James Taylor's Sweet Baby James, because that's one he would sing to us. There is a wonderful video of Garth Brooks trying to sing it, and he cries. It's the same with me. Also, Dolly Parton's Coat of Many Colors. I remember there was also a storybook, and we loved that book. My nieces and nephew took part in the Imagination Library too. Story 103. My father used to read The Lord of the Rings to me when I was a kid. It made me a lifelong fantasy book lover. I admittedly do not read as much as I used to, but I get back into it every now and then. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.